Mind your business.
Mind your business. Mind your business. Mind your business.
For the people who are learning to mind their business.
Hello and welcome to Mind Your Business. I'm Phil Hudson. Tug Cowart is out. We have a special guest today. As you know, I like to fanboy out around the business people, and we definitely have one that's got the military angle, so I'm pumped, and sports angle. Pumped to have him here. AMB Group CEO Steve Cannon, former Mercedes-Benz CEO, former Army officer, and former West Point. I guess you're always a West Point graduate. And West Point graduate, Steve Cannon's here. So, Steve, thanks for joining us this morning.
Phil, great to be with you.
And so we got a long weekend this weekend. It's Labor Day weekend. You got any plans?
I am going to take the last weekend before we really kick into high gear and head off with my wife. So we're going to spend one weekend and then
take some breathers.
Football season starts now, overlapping with our soccer season. So it gets pretty busy around Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So you got to pick your moments when you can sort of take a weekend off.
Has the kind of like stunning? I don't know how to, have you gotten used to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, or is it still like, oh man, this is unreal?
Oh man, this is unreal.
Yeah, I still get it.
Love it. I spend a lot of time walking around that building before every game, match, concert. I do my kind of pregame routine, which usually involves about 3 or 4 miles of circling and talking to associates and attending our pregame huddles with our game day staffs. It's just an amazing place. But for us, I kind of refer to it as our laboratory, right? It's our fan experience laboratory, and we're never done. So we just introduced cashless. We're trying to be at the cutting edge of serving our fans every single day. And although we're doing a great job, I see 1,000 ways that we can get better. So that's what gets me excited to get out of bed every morning. The
cashless is a big angle y'all are doing. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, obviously. And so NPR did one on Planet Money, and they talked about the fan pricing being a huge model that turned out to be really profitable for y'all. And then now the cashless is going to make it even more seamless. So what is that? Is that more about making it easier on the customer, or is that just because people aren't carrying cash?
It's all about the customer, right? It's
the speed of sale and stuff like that.
It's about the transaction time. So our demand model comes at the quarter breaks and at the halftime, and our ability to serve the customer and transact as quickly as we can during those breaks determines whether a customer, gets his hot dog and beer and gets back to the
especially
to their
during
seats.
Soccer too.
Yeah, so it's all about speed of transaction, and when you take cash out of the equation, you just can move people through the lines much more quickly. Plus, you take cash management out of the building, so we don't have cash runners and cash drawer counters. So the complexity of handling cash is frankly nice to remove from the equation. But at the end of the day, it's about serving the customer. And I think we did this in a really smart way, because there are people out there that are unbanked, that don't have credit cards, and we want to be able to serve them too. So we came up with these reverse ATM machines where anybody that might not have a credit card can come in with cash. They go to one of the 10 that are distributed throughout the building. They feed in their cash. Out comes a universal debit Visa card that will allow them to transact anywhere in the building. So I think we've done it in a smart and fan-centric way. And so far now, almost through the Atlanta United season, it's really gone off without a hitch.
That's awesome. People forget about the underbanked thing, because part of Arthur's vision so people who don't know, AMB Group is Arthur Blank's family of businesses. PGA Superstore, Atlanta United, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the Falcons. Is it Mountain Sky Guest Ranch?
That's right.
I've never had the invite out there, but Arthur, if you're listening, wink, wink. And what is there anything else I'm missing?
No, you got it.
Okay. But a lot of people don't know, part of his initiative when he was doing Mercedes-Benz Stadium was kind of helping rejuvenate the West Side. And Citizens Trust Bank, it's a historically black bank in Georgia with the Russell family. They put out a lot of statistics about that area being extremely underbanked. And, financial literacy is a big thing they're trying to promote over there. So I think it makes a lot of sense when you're hitting that demographic. Hey, you got to let them, find a way to purchase stuff and, get with it. So I think the cashless app's known underbanked, that works for them for sure.
Arthur is an inclusive guy, and he wants to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and is welcome at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. There was a little bit of controversy that swirled around going cashless. It happened in the city of Philadelphia, where more and more restaurants went cash-free, and there was a bit of a pushback, and they were actually thinking about introducing legislation to prevent that.
Well, it's on a bill. It says, this is legal tender.
Right, that's right. But at the end, for us, the way we did it is we got these reverse ATMs. We do not charge a transaction fee. So for anybody that comes in, We say that we're cash free, but if you come in and you only have cash, go to one of the 10
You figure it
reverse
out.
ATMs and you're all set.
That's awesome. So pretty easily.
Yeah.
Cool. So one thing I wanted to know, you went to West Point, and so I've heard, and we were talking about this a little bit before, I've heard Arthur give your introduction a lot, and I think his favorite fact about you is that you hold the push-up record, still hold the push-up record at West Point. I know it makes you a little bit embarrassed or whatever, but I've always said I think that your biggest accomplishment is that you went into the artillery from West Point. And we were talking about everyone at West Point gets an engineering degree in addition to a field of their choice. And so usually, and I didn't know this, you said pilots were a big one, but obviously engineers, cream of the crop, infantry, cream of the crop, and artillery, cream of the crop. And then you went to Germany,
Right.
Which was at that point still kind of in the Cold War. Was it the Cold War?
It was the
very
Cold
much
War.
the Cold
Oh, yeah,
War.
yeah.
So it's probably pretty intense, right? So I mean I think that is definitely an overlooked thing in your career, where it's like you're not just some Joe. I was in the military. I was just a Joe Schmo, so they threw me on the line. Where if you're going to be an officer in probably the most fortified area in the world, that's a pretty big deal. So what was that like when it's like, hey man, you're going to go sit on the border?
Yeah, no, we were a border patrol unit. I was actually there from 1987 to 87 to 90.
Okay.
The wall came down in 89, so
Oh, wow,
I was
so you're
right
there.
on the wall as the wall came down.
Do you have a piece of the wall at your house?
I do, as a
That's
matter
cool.
of fact. It was a pretty neat, though, to be right there, kind of front row seat for such an important historical moment.
Yeah.
You know, the uprisings, they started in Czechoslovakia, they spread to East Germany, and before you knew it, legal crossings started cropping up all around the wall. We were on high alert. Any moment of significant change, we didn't know how that was going to go down as the military. So for us, it was a moment of fairly high tension. But to have that whole thing roll out in such a peaceful way and as fast as it did, 40 years of stalemate.
Yeah.
That was the Cold War, and it evaporated almost overnight. So that was a tense but really rewarding moment.
Is it similar to the border in North Korea and South Korea today, or more tense because the Russians had a legit military?
I would say right now, kind of in retrospect, the North Korea, South Korea is a really tense border. Ours was as well. I mean, we had East German guards. They were barbed wire and minefields and watchtowers. I mean, if you looked at the fortification all along the East German Czechoslovakian border, it was formative, and it was reinforced over the 40 years. And look, there was gamesmanship that went on all the time, back and forth. You know, our patrol unit would move inside the legal distance from the actual wall,
just to get the blood flowing on the other side.
just to kick up a little dust and get them into alert mode.
Let them know we're Americans.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But you know, it was just, you know, our job while we were there was to be prepared to kind of fight the Cold War. We were prepared for an incursion through East Germany into West Germany, and that's the battle plan that we had to fight, you know, on paper and in training. And it's great that obviously that never took place. But hey, since I've been out of the Army, the military's been pretty busy with, you know, Gulf War I happened not long after I got out, and we've been continuously deployed since 9/11. You know, 18 years. I mean, people don't realize this is the longest stretch that our military has been put in combat situations in the history of our country. So 18 years now, we're in either Iraq or Afghanistan, and if you talk to soldiers, you know, they've been on 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 deployments. You were on what, one deployment to Afghanistan?
That's all I needed.
Yeah, but now you talk to soldiers that have been in and around the Army for a while.
Weird.
And it's 5 deployments,
It's
6
sad.
deployments.
Some of them are away from their families longer than they've been with them. It's sad.
Which is why
That's the sacrifice.
for me. You know, I'm committed to doing whatever I can in the position that I have, connected to these amazing and powerful platforms, to make sure that we continue to shine a spotlight on service and sacrifice. The fact that we're out there deployed for 18 years, and we're asking soldiers and their families to step up in that kind of way. Think about it: 5 deployments. That means you're away from your friends and your family and your home for almost 5 full years.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about the greatest generation, you know, World War II. Well, World War II, their deployment was maybe max 3 years. That's what we asked of them during that historic moment. Now we've got soldiers in harm's way for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. So we really are asking a lot, and I do believe that's, you know, it's part of our societal commitment that if we put them in harm's way it's our job to do everything we can to wrap our arms around them when they come back, to help them in transitioning out of the military and into a productive and successful civilian life. So I know Arthur is absolutely committed to that, as is Dan Quinn and myself. And
where did Arthur get the patriotic bug? Because he is, for a public executive, a very public business executive in Atlanta, very open about being very patriotic and supporting the military. So where did he get that bug?
I think I think he's always had it.
Got
right.
it.
Arthur is at his core a service-oriented human being. He believes that giving back is an obligation, and he's been doing it for his entire career. It's one of the core values of our company to give back. So
just kind of his ethos.
It's his ethos, but now we get to see that ethos, and we've seen it for all the years that he's been in Atlanta. He speaks with actions and not just with words, and his commitment to the community here in Atlanta, to the military, to the causes that are really broad-based, really make him kind of one of the unique owners in
Absolutely.
sports.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you transition to the civilian side of things?
That moment where I realized, okay, I've served my 5 years. That was my commitment after West Point. I decided that I was going to get out of the Army after that. And then I just went out looking for a job. So I came back from Germany to the United States, started working with some military recruiters, and had a number of job opportunities. But the cool one that I gravitated to was this chief of staff for the president and CEO of Mercedes-Benz of North America. So of the couple of different job opportunities that I had line of sight to getting out, that was the one that I found most compelling. And so I tossed my hat in and began, fresh out of the Army in my civilian life, working for Mercedes-Benz.
Was the German culture very prevalent in Mercedes-Benz, like very rigid, engineering-minded?
I won't say rigid, but I worked for a guy named Eric Krumpe, kind of a tall, imperious German, but was a wonderful, wonderful guy. And I owe him a lot, because he was he represented my start in kind of the civilian world. He liked my West Point background. I learned to speak German while I was over in Germany.
No kidding.
So that was something that helped to differentiate me. And he said, look, I know that you don't know anything about the car business. That doesn't matter to me. I like your background. I'll teach you the car business. And sure enough, working for him directly for about 3 years, what I appreciated most is he was both kind of boss and mentor, and he was really generous with his time with me. So as I was learning the business, I'd be sitting in his office 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and he would take the time to just coach and talk and help me connect dots about what drives the auto business and Mercedes-Benz. So
did he just kind of take that role on his own, or did you kind of ask him?
No, he did.
That's cool.
I did ask a little bit, because he knew I didn't know the background of the car business.
Yeah, sure.
But the fact that he was willing to accept that and teach me along the way, I feel really grateful that I landed a great first boss and mentor in that business, which is probably why I stayed in that business.
Heck of a company too.
Yeah,
it's not a bad way to come out. We got a decent resume. So at the same time, you kind of graduated with like an all-star class at West Point.
I did.
Tell us a little bit about some of the guys you graduated with, and how does it compare to other classes at West Point? Like, I always heard one of the greatest classes they had was during the Civil War, because basically every general on both sides was a West Point grad. So how do you look at that in terms of West Point's history, and tell us about some of the guys that you graduated with?
Yeah, that's one of the things that captivated me about West Point, is that we've got this thing they call the long gray line, and it's our graduates linked across history through that common experience that was the education and the military training at West Point. There was this poster that I saw as I was thinking about going to West Point, and it had MacArthur, it had Eisenhower, it had Ulysses Grant, their heads, and the headline of the poster was, "Much of the history we teach was made by the people we taught."
Oh, wow.
And if you think about that, that's pretty cool. And yes, in the Civil War, every major battle was commanded by a West Pointer. The class of 1911, they call it the class that the stars. No, I think it was 1915. The class that the stars fell on, and
is that like the
Bradley and Eisenhower?
So the World War II guys.
It's the World War II guys. So every major significant development, whether that's railroads or the wars, West Point engineers were involved in the building of this country. West Point was started in 1802. and it is intrinsically linked to the growth and the history of this country, which is pretty cool. So fast forward to my class of 1986, a great group, and a group that now for 35 plus years I'm connected to, and we get together not just at class reunions. In fact, we get together to help raise money for soldiers. We can talk about that in a minute, but one of the prominent classmates, Mike Pompeo. We were lieutenants stationed together in the same cavalry squadron in Germany.
Do you have a Stetson?
I don't have the artillery guys. So those were for the tankers.
Come on, wait. They're not for the tankers. The tankers stole them from the scouts.
They did. So the scouts and the tankers.
Steve, I give you permission to wear a Stetson.
All right, I'll wear and the spurs. I did have spurs though. So thank you very much.
There you go. Yes. Did you have to do a spur ride?
We did have to do a spur ride.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So someone hazed Steve Cannon back in the day.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah, many times. So Mike Pompeo, now our Secretary of State, was a buddy lieutenant of mine stationed together in Germany. Another guy, Dr. Mark Esper, we were classmates at West Point. He is now the Secretary of Defense. So we've got a couple of really prominent classmates, but not to mention I probably have 50 classmates that are CEOs across the country doing great things. So, honored to be part of a really cool. Obviously, West Point, that's a brotherhood in and of itself. But inside of that brotherhood, a set of classmates that are out there making their mark on the world. But more importantly, we are united by service. So just because a bunch of us hung up our uniforms after our 5-year commitment, or some stayed in for 10, and there are those that are still serving. And one of my classmates, Joe Martin, is now the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, just pinned on his 4th star.
Wow.
So my classmates are now kind of running the Army, which is really, really cool. But a lot of folks hung up their uniform, but what is really neat about it is they're still serving. So they're serving their country in a different uniform, in different ways. And that's sort of the spirit that I think unites all of us, this spirit of service that says, all right, we started our careers in service to our country, and we try to find ways to continue to do that.
Was there ever a point at West Point when you were like, man, I'm around with some all-stars right now, and in 20 or 30 years, like, it's going to be amazing to see where these people are? Or is it just like, man, this is military school. I want to get out of here and go start my career?
On any given day, it was a little bit of both, but because it was such a hard environment. But what I found most compelling about West Point, for me, it represented, it was Mount Everest. It was that gigantic challenge. But what I loved most about it is the company that we got to keep while we were at West Point. So these are the best and brightest from the best high schools all across America.
Yeah, you're not getting drugged down. You're getting lifted up.
Oh my gosh, you're getting lifted up. I mean, the number of captains of teams and valedictorians and folks that were really accomplished, because it wasn't easy to get into West Point. So I was surrounded by the kind of the best and the brightest, which got you going. I mean, you needed to show up every single day in that kind of company if you wanted to succeed. So that was great.
So that's funny, because I went to like a regular traditional school, not really regular, Alabama. It's cream of the crop in the South. But I was in a fraternity, so it's kind of the other way around, where it's like, man, that guy went and was really successful, which is like, he's the rare one. Where at West Point, it's like, yeah, everyone's like that. Get used to it. It's like, if you're the other way, that's weird. So all right, so you go from the Army, you go straight to Mercedes-Benz, you work there, you rise through the ranks. How did you become CEO? And what was that day like when you actually found out it was done and you were going to move into that role? Was that a big deal? Was that like one of the top 5 professional moments in your life?
It was a neat moment to think that 20 years after I took that job, and it was just under 20 years when I took the job as the assistant to the CEO. And I remember thinking when I started and when I was working for this gentleman, Eric Krumpa, who was then CEO, I thought, how cool would that be to have a job like that? Because I thought, it was big, it was complex, it was for a global top 10 brand.
Yeah.
And then 20 years later to have the opportunity to take that role was a huge moment. But I had an interesting and kind of unique journey inside of Mercedes-Benz. So I started in Montvale, New Jersey. That was the North American headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
Worked for the CEO for a couple of years. He gets promoted to global head of sales and marketing, and he asked me to join him when he was moving back to Germany. So I had another one of these kind of crossroads moments where I thought, I'm finally, hitting my stride here in the U.S., getting comfortable with the lay of the land, feeling like I'm adding value. Now he wants to take me out of
wants to
North
keep you in
America
growth mode.
and bring me over to Germany. So I thought about that, went back and talked to the family about it and made the decision, this is too great of an opportunity. So I go back to Germany, worked there for a couple of years. That got my German skills, the language skills, to kind of from good to really good. So where I was comfortable, kind of in any conversation and any meeting room with my German fluency. That made me unique, though. So there weren't a whole lot of Americans out there that could speak fluent German. Then all of a sudden, the board decides we need to diversify outside of production in Germany, and they targeted North America to build the first sport utility plant outside of Germany. So there I am, this American.
Roll Tide, right?
Roll Tide,
There you go.
and I was part of that. This American who spoke German, right there, and available. So I got pulled into this Skunkworks project all about setting up a new facility in North America, which was an unbelievable opportunity. So I got to help select where that location would be.
Gigantic. You can see from the interstate.
Yeah, so it's a $4 billion facility.
Is it really? I didn't know that.
And back then, here I am 4 years into my career at Mercedes-Benz, and I was sent by the board with a small team of associates to evaluate and select where in the United States that we should build a plant for Mercedes-Benz, which was neat. And we kind of traveled through North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, and ultimately we decided on Alabama. But that was a unique and formative moment, in that early career.
Is that what kind of prepped you to have the capability to make the move to Atlanta?
It did. I felt very comfortable. So having gone
you're used
through
to
that,
scouting land.
I went through that site selection once, and most people don't get to do that ever in their careers.
Yeah.
And the fact that I got to do it twice, once for a manufacturing plant, and then a second time for our North American sales and marketing headquarters, was really neat and unique. And all of that, brought me to Atlanta, which eventually, had my paths crossed with Arthur Blank, which eventually got me to my role. So interesting that. The journey has interesting and unplanned little crossroads along the way, and luck and serendipity also plays a role.
So, and I know it's a much longer story than I'm going to give you time for, but give us a 2-minute story of how you met Arthur and ended up. So I heard that basically the Metro Atlanta Chamber was trying to recruit y'all, and they were like, "Hey, Mr. Blank, we really need you at a meeting, and we can't tell you who it is. We just really need you there." And he came, and that's kind of what. Is that true?
You got it. Yeah, that's
okay.
That's pretty close to true. So we were Company X. At that point, we were in our kind of evaluating the finalist cities for where we would put our North American headquarters. So we had our executive team. We were all together. We had 2 days here in Atlanta. And, the chamber sort of plotted out that 2 days and who we were going to meet and where we were going to go and what we were going to do during that 2-day time frame. Well, they took us over to the sales center, which was in Buckhead at that time because the stadium was just being built and just being sold. So we go to the sales center. Arthur Blank shows up, gives us he shows up in a, dapper as ever. He's in a pair of jeans and a sport coat. So informal for Arthur Blank. And he doesn't know who we are because we're Company X, but he couldn't have been nicer and more welcoming. And he gave us kind of a 20-minute stand-up about how important Atlanta was and what a great city it was and how it was the roots of Home Depot started right here in Atlanta. And he told us that story, and we had a great little exchange. And it was funny because right at the end, he said, hey, and who knows, maybe one day your name will be on our building, because he was in sales mode for obviously for the naming rights of the deal.
Probably the biggest sale of his life.
And who knew? Because he didn't know that we were Mercedes-Benz. And I looked back at him and I say, well, our name is already on one stadium. And I could see his brain start clicking, because at that point we had our name on the Superdome.
Yeah.
In
New Orleans. Yeah.
So just interesting. That was my first encounter with Arthur Blank, and then a year later, I'm working for him as his CEO, or maybe a year and a half later.
Wow. So was it weird going from, I guess, Mercedes isn't public, but is it weird going from kind of a corporate community to a much more family kind of based company?
Yeah. So big. It is a big public company. It's traded on the DAX in Germany. Yes.
Okay.
It's a big public company.
I'm an American in Georgia, so
global,
I just think.
No, not so. Yes, moving from big global public to sort of private family of businesses
Night and day.
was night and day, but in a positive way.
Yeah.
The fact that I got one shareholder, I got one chairman. That when we talk about strategy or investment, I need to take my case to Arthur, and I need to make that case, and we can make quick decisions just like that. In Germany, much more complex. You've got a lot of constituents, so the decision to relocate from New Jersey to Germany, I had about 10 layers of decision making, all the way up to the board of management and the supervisory board that had to approve, a couple $100 million decision to relocate the company. So it's simpler and quicker working in a private setting and with a guy like Arthur. So I kind of not looking back, enjoying every minute of that transition. But what I found kind of is it's more, moving from cars to sports, there's more similarities than differences.
It's people, right?
It's just people, and it's at the end, it's about creating an amazing experience. So all we tried to do while I was at the helm for Mercedes-Benz in North America was to elevate the customer experience, the ownership experience, the pride that you associate with the ownership of a Mercedes-Benz. We worked really hard on that. Well, now it's not customer experience, it's fan experience. So it's really just about fanatically focusing on the needs of your customer, and in our case now, our fans, and finding ways to deliver on that. So I feel like I'm kind of doing the same things, just in a different industry.
So we'll switch out of Mercedes-Benz and kind of get to where you're doing now. But actually, we'll just get into it now. So when I look at the CEO of AMB Group, I'm always like, well, you got Rich McKay, you got Darren, you got these guys that know what the heck they're doing. So what is your involvement with actual Falcons and United when it comes to that? Is it more just, hey guys, here's what the whole family's kind of doing, and here's your individual lane, give me an update, and I'll go update Arthur? Like, how does that work?
No, so
because Arthur's very much hands-on with his teams.
I'm a hands-on guy too, and I'm not a holding company. This isn't a holding company situation. We've got really strong people. We've got Dick Sullivan, who's the president of PGA Tour Superstores. You got Rich McKay, you got Darren Eales. These are seasoned executives, in and of them, in their own right. But we are now a growing business, right? We've gone from a couple of hundred, we've doubled and tripled, our headcount over the last several years. And, and I bring some skill sets around customer focus, around managing big and complex projects like the relocation for Mercedes-Benz from New Jersey to Atlanta. And, as I joined, we were building that little thing downtown called Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
Yeah.
Pretty complex project, had a lot of issues attached to it with the steel structure, and we had some delays that we had to manage through. So look, I'm thrilled that I get to work with such competent people, but together with Darren on soccer issues, with Dick on golf-related issues for the growth of the PGA Tour Superstores, and with Rich in and around the Falcons, we work together to grow the company, to grow the culture, and to grow the business outcomes.
That would be a heck of a competitive golf foursome. Y'all four. That would be insane.
Well, Rich McKay is the premier golfer in the group. So he
Really?
golfed. He was, he might have been captain of his golf team at Princeton back in the day.
No kidding.
So he's got a beautiful, beautiful golf game. Beats Darren, Dick, and I hands down every time. But if there's a guy you want to play golf with, it's Rich McKay. Number one, he's a great trash talker. He's a great storyteller, and he puts it down the center of the fairway every single time. So it's fun to play.
Best ball game for sure.
It's a fun outing when you play golf with Rich McKay.
So I did think of my Mercedes-Benz. So when Mercedes came, y'all were just on the heels of Porsche, and was Detlev the CEO at that point?
He was.
So was there any kind of like man, we don't want to go right where Porsche just went? Was there any of that?
We thought about that. Yeah.
And what overrode that?
Porsche is a much smaller company and smaller brand in the United States, and they built a beautiful facility down there by the airport. We did look at it. We kind of thought about it, but the end, the criteria that mattered most was the market and the talent inside of that market, access to talent, right? So, big, growing, dynamic market of Atlanta. companies are moving in. You've got Georgia Tech at the center, so you've got a young population, you've got a highly educated population, you've got a really strong quality of life. So one of the biggest factors that we evaluated in moving from New Jersey down here to Atlanta is what is the quality of life that we can offer our associates, so to make sure that they're happy about the relocation and that they can thrive. And ultimately, Atlanta delivered that in spades, more so than the other cities. We were looking at Raleigh, North Carolina, and really the other finalist was Dallas. And our team came down here, evaluated all of those factors, and we unanimously came away with Atlanta for our decision. You know, even though Porsche was there, we figured, hey, look, Porsche and Mercedes-Benz face off in their home market of Germany. They're both from Stuttgart, right? So why not just replicate that here in Atlanta?
That's
So
my
what we
Alabama
did.
kicking in, calling it Porsche. There, was it called Porsche? And then they were like, "Hey, Americans, you're doing it wrong."
It's so in German you pronounce kind of every letter. So it is Porsche if
Gotcha.
you said that in German, and we sort of shorten everything here in the United States, so we clip off the E.
With all your time spent in Germany, can you drink American beer anymore?
I cannot.
Really?
I cannot. You get spoiled. A good German beer, which goes back to like 1000, 1100. They've been practicing a little longer in the beer production business than we have.
Was it German monks?
German monks. In fact, my town in Bayreuth had a giant brewery that had been around for 500-600 years, and so you did get spoiled, and it's hard for me to sort of drink this stuff this light stuff that they call beer.
So I remember when we would get guys I was in the 101st up in Fort Campbell, and so we would get guys coming from Germany, and they're always a little bit heavier and a little bit slower, and it took about a month for them to get back into it, and it's just, man, I want to go to Germany. But so the one of the big things I think in Atlanta was when Arthur hired you and it came over. What did he hire you to do, and how'd that go down?
It was another neat story because, again, a little bit of luck kind of played its part. So I'm up in Connecticut, getting ready to move my family down to Atlanta. I'd already kind of found a house, so I was about a year away from.
What part of town are y'all in?
We're in kind of West Buckhead. We're not far from, right around Westminster,
Yeah.
the high school.
Yeah.
So that's the part of town that, and I ultimately selected my home to then reverse commute back to Sandy Springs, which is where the headquarters was going to be, and then something else intervened.
Oh, that's crazy to think about. Yeah, that's interesting.
So I'm up in Connecticut having a catch-up dinner with a good buddy of mine from West Point,
Mm-hmm.
and it just so happens that he knew the vice chairman of Korn Ferry. That's the search company that Arthur retained to find a CEO. But for that dinner where he explained to me, hey, I know this guy, and he's, Arthur Blank, you know him, right? Haven't you met him in your kind of relocation activities for Mercedes-Benz? Well, turns out that night over dinner, I found out that Arthur was even looking for a CEO. So for a private company, it's not like you advertise the fact that Arthur was looking for a CEO for the first time. So, but for that dinner, I never would have found out about the opportunity. I listened to him, and he said, hey, PGA Tour Superstores, he's building this amazing stadium, the Falcons, this new startup franchise called Atlanta United. And I slept on it after hearing about it.
This little thing called Atlanta United.
Yeah, this little thing.
Yeah.
But at that point, it was
It was
a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah.
It wasn't a brand
powerhouse that it is. Yeah.
So I slept on it, and then I called my buddy back and said, man, that sounds too interesting. You got to give me the name of that Korn Ferry recruiter. So sure enough, he did. I called him up, said, hey.
So it was you that reached out.
So I reached out and said, hey, I'm Steve Cannon, and this is what I've been doing, and hey, I'm interested in potentially being a candidate for this.
Hey, I worked at this little company called Mercedes. You might have heard of it.
And sure enough, that dinner spawned that conversation that turned into me throwing my hat in the ring, and many meetings later, after sort of sitting down together with Arthur, he offered me the job, and it's been an amazing transition. How many people get to in their 50s switch industries, right? Normally, when you're in an industry, whatever that industry is, and I was in the car space, you generally tend to stay there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to have this unique opportunity to
And
move
from one cool industry to another cool industry too.
I went from
cars to sports.
I went from super cool to unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
I pinch myself when I think about, Mercedes was it is an amazing brand, an amazing company. They put out unbelievable products. So I loved working for Mercedes-Benz, but now to be part of, the NFL, the Atlanta Falcons, Atlanta United, this amazing stadium in downtown Atlanta, like it got even better.
So I want to get into some stuff y'all are doing kind of with the military and just kind of giving back to that side of the house. But first, I got to know, have you ever taken advantage of your position to meet an artist, an athlete, something at Mercedes-Benz Stadium or Falcons? Like if I were you, I'd be like, hey, Arthur, can I go take Julio Jones to dinner? Like, please, can you make him go to dinner with me?
No, I never did anything like that, certainly. Look, I was around that a lot at Mercedes-Benz. I got to do some really cool stuff.
I guess you get to walk in the room and be a fly on the wall.
We were the sponsor of one of the coolest things I got to do is the big U.S. Open tennis tournament. It's going on right now. Yeah. Well, Mercedes-Benz was the title sponsor for that, and I got to hand out the
trophy,
$2 million check, on national TV. And I looked in the envelope, and wow, there's a lot of zeros on that check. And I got to hand it to Roger Federer at one year, to Novak Djokovic on a different year. So I've gotten some pretty cool opportunities to meet stars and celebrities, and I try not to be too starstruck in those moments. But when they come my way, I enjoy them, but I don't go out of my way and stalk Julio or any of our other players just because that's really not very cool. So
yeah. So we had, Mitch Shaw. He's co-owner of the Hawks, but he's a basketball fanatic. So he's a fan that bought his way in. And so I was like, hey man, do you ever sneak in the locker room after the games? He's like, dude, I want to all the time, but same thing, it's inappropriate.
Right.
All right. Well, with that said, what are y'all doing on the military side of things? You were talking about kind of giving back to military families and stuff like that when before we got going.
So I saw a unique opportunity when I joined. Dan Quinn is a huge supporter of the military. He's been doing it for his entire life coaching career.
Any idea where that came from? Where he got that bug?
The whole brotherhood.
His mantra.
He feels a kinship to the military, the football and the military. That brotherhood, that bond. That I'm here to serve the person next to me is something that he's just borrowed so heavily and pulls so heavily from the military in his culture creation and his teaching and his coaching practice. So automatically, Dan Quinn fully involved. Arthur Blank had been, giving back to military causes for many years, and then I joined with my background, and it just, uniquely, as I took on the CEO role. Two of my classmates were commanding generals in Fort Benning and Fort Stewart. So two of the premier installations here in Georgia. Yeah. And so eventually I went to Arthur and said, hey, listen, I've spoken to both of my classmates. We have this really unique opportunity to really make a difference and to set a standard. So if there's if you look at the state of Georgia, we've got Fort Benning, we've got Stewart, we've got Gordon, we've got probably a higher concentration of military and their families in our state than any other state.
Dobbins right down the road.
So if there is a NFL franchise that needs to get honoring the military and giving back to the military right, it should be the Atlanta Falcons. Yeah. So we had that conversation. I said, Arthur, we're gonna go become benchmark, and he said, go for it. And since then, we've been just using our platform, that is the NFL and the Atlanta Falcons and Mercedes-Benz Stadium, to find ways to honor and give back to the military. Military appreciation is part of NFL's Salute to Service. Most teams do a Salute to Service game in the month of November during Veterans Day. Salute to Service for us is 52 weeks a year. We find ways to honor the military every single outing at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So we've done some pretty neat things. We took a USO trip to Iraq. That was one of the neatest trips I've ever done in my entire life. So Coach Quinn, a couple players, a small contingent of us flew into Kuwait City, and then we spent
It's super hot, right?
It was about 112.
Oh, man, that's the worst tarmac in the world.
112 degrees, unbelievable. But then we spent 3 days going from forward operating base to forward operating base throughout Iraq, and we got to meet the soldiers. We got to spend time with them, and we all came away absolutely blown away by the conditions that they serve in and how they serve us. And for me, my big takeaway is that if more Americans got to see what our soldiers do for us on the front edge of freedom every single day, they would go out of their way to find ways to not just say thank you, but to give back to the military, because it was absolutely amazing. So think about it. They're deployed for an entire year. They're in conditions that at 110 degrees. They work 17 hours a day. They're in harm's way doing missions and patrols. So we ask a ton of our military, and our ability to then just use this amazing platform, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, to give back to them is, I feel, kind of an obligation. So
I think it's good because you're kind of showing the corporate community, it's like, hey, this is kind of our responsibility. At the end of the day, the government's limited. The economy's not,
That's right.
hopefully in America. So let's step in where we can.
It's a public-private partnership. At the end, we have an all-volunteer military, right? That means that high school kids, when they graduate, they got to raise their hand and serve country. If serving their country became a negative, whereby they'd serve and then they couldn't find a job after getting out of the military, suddenly fewer and fewer people would raise their hand for that service. So our ability to help the government in transitioning soldiers out and then wrapping our arms around them, in business, so that they can make that successful transition, so that they can hang up one uniform, pick up another, and then they can essentially take care of their families, because that's all they want to do. That's what we try to do. So we've hosted hiring fairs at Mercedes-Benz. We do that regularly.
Yeah, y'all just had one like a week or two ago.
And that's about, we've got,
and it's big. It's blue chip companies that come in.
Blue chip companies. We've got a great corporate base here in Atlanta, and we try to help out in the matchmaking process, because what I know, having served and now having hired many veterans, is that they're an amazing resource. They've been in leadership positions. They've been able to problem solve in difficult circumstances. So the qualities that soldiers bring to the table, even if they don't necessarily know your business yet, they can learn that. They learn that very rapidly. So I've had a great track record of hiring veterans, and really in every instance it's worked out positively. So I try to encourage companies wherever I can to say, hey, look at that resource out there and hire a veteran.
So I got something to ask you. It's a favor. So we had Major General Thomas Carden on the podcast, the head of the Georgia Army National Guard, and he's never been to a college football game, and he's a hardcore Georgia fan. So I got a favor. If Georgia makes it to the SEC championship, can you invite him to a game?
Absolutely.
That dude deserves to go to a game.
He's coming to our Salute to Service game. I see Tom on a pretty regular basis, because we find ways to work together.
He's an amazing guy.
We have members of his National Guard. They're at every single game or match that happens at Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
They do the color presentation,
whether that's
right?
the color guard, we invite soldiers and their families on a regular basis, just so that they can enjoy Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and we do that just as a good citizen. So I'm a big fan of Major General Carden's, and we're gonna and we work together to help him serve his soldiers, because that's what he does. He's got a big job, and any way that we can help him, we try to.
Well, I know you're trying to get out of here for the long weekend, so I'm going to leave you with this. If there's one message you need to get out as the CEO of AMB Group, what is it?
One message is...
One message. I'll let you think about that. Is it Arthur at the office, or is it Mr. Blank?
I call it's Arthur. It's Arthur.
Okay.
But everybody's... it's a sign of respect. It's Mr. Blank for all that he's done inside of this community. My message is keep the faith. Atlanta United, they're in wonderful form right now as we head towards the final stretch of our soccer season. Just won the U.S. Open Championship Cup. So right now, Atlanta United simultaneously holds all the important championships for Major League Soccer in North America. We're the MLS Cup champions. We won the Campeones Cup against La Liga in Mexico, and now the U.S. Open Championship. So the amazing story continues for Atlanta United, and our preseason just ended last night on a positive note in Jacksonville, Florida, and we're getting ready to go to Minnesota for our first matchup against the Vikings. So exciting times, and it's great to just be a center point that gets to bring Atlanta together on any given Wednesday or Sunday. 70,000 people in Mercedes-Benz Stadium cheering their hearts out for one of their favorite teams. That's a pretty rewarding place to be.
I do have one more for you. So you have a West Point ring. I hope Atlanta United championship ring. If you got a Super Bowl ring, what would be your most coveted? Because the United rings are sweet.
Look, I think the West Point ring, I had to work the hardest for that one, and that does connect me, to all of my that long gray line
Absolutely.
we talked about earlier. So that one will always have a special place. Even though they're all too big, I don't wear any of them, but I got a nice, I've got a growing ring case that will hopefully continue to grow.
Very cool. Well, Steve Cannon, thanks for coming in. You've been listening to Mind Your Business, sponsored by SR Homes. Please visit them at srhomes.com. Steve, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Phil.
At SR Homes, our end goal is to create a home that's unique to you, one that you and your family will enjoy for years to come. With over 4 decades of home building experience, SR Homes has become a top home builder in Atlanta, offering a variety of communities in the most sought-after locations. Locally owned and operated, SR Homes is a builder focused on you. For more information, visit us at srhomes.com.